Welcome to episode 4 in our series of Seamly Basics. Our fourth topic is going to be arcs, circles, and ellipses. Okay, so I've gone ahead and cleaned up a little bit before we start this next section on arcs. We're going to start with the first tool, and the only thing you need to select on your draft block to create an arc with radius and angles is to select a center point. So we're going to go with A6. Let's say the radius is 1 centimeter, so we can look at it, set our first angle to 0, and our second angle to, how about 30 degrees? There we go. So see, it just draws the portion of the circle that would exist from 0 to 30 degrees. So if I wanted a quarter of a circle, I would punch in 90, 180 for a half circle, and 360 for a complete circle. So when I use this tool, oftentimes I want to make sure the circle is touching other things that I've drawn. So in this case, if I wanted my circle to just touch A3 and A2, it might be worthwhile to go into the formula wizard, go into line lengths, grab line AA1, which is this complete distance here, because we see AA1 over here, meaning if I wanted the radius, I should divide that in half, not by 5, and hit apply. So super easy tool to use. We're actually going to leave that arc up there for now so we can use it when we look at our next tool. So the next tool we're going to use is going to feel very familiar. It is the point on arc, and it works much the same as the point on line and point on curve tools. So we're just going to click our arc, knowing that because we said 0 degrees was the starting point of our arc and 360 was the ending, we need to think about our point moving this way if we come forward from the start point. So if I say I want a length of 1 centimeter, that makes sense. We see this green portion, that is our 1 centimeter away from where we started. And again, if you wanted to make sure, like, well, I want my point halfway across the circle, you don't have to calculate how far that would be. We can go into curve lengths, and our only curve right now is the arc we just drew. And let's divide by 2. And see, that puts that on the complete opposite side. So just by using your variables, you should be able to get points pretty much anywhere you want them using this tool. I'm going to go ahead and clean up, and then we can talk about the next tool in the set. So before we look at the next tool, I want to draw an arc specifically to intersect A3 and A5. So let's go for a radius of 5, a first angle of 15, and a second angle of 85, and see how close I got. Okay, that looks pretty good. So what we can then do, we can click our intersect arc and axis. You start by choosing your arc, and then choosing your axis point. So now, see that I've got a point anywhere along that axis. So I could choose any angle off of A3 here. If I put in 0 or 360, it would give me the point on line A3, A5. Maybe I want a different angle, but again, we can click, go into properties, and adjust. Maybe I want something like a 45-degree angle. But yeah, you can take any point and draw a line at a particular angle to any arc you've drawn. Kind of a niche case. I don't use it a lot when I'm drafting patterns, but you might. I've gone ahead and cleaned up a little bit. So to use our intersect arcs tool, we need 2 arcs that actually intersect. So I'm going to go ahead and draw those really quickly. And let's just draw complete circles. Okay, and let's draw another circle off of A5 and just make sure they intersect. There we go. So when I use the intersect arcs tool, I should be identifying these 2 points. So intersect arcs, we select our first arc, we select our second arc, and there we go. It grabs A7 for us. So we can also specify if we want their first point of intersection or their second point. And if you need both, just go ahead and use the tool again, but pretty straightforward. After a little bit of cleanup, we're ready to talk about the Intersect Circles tool. And this one's kind of interesting because you are creating the intersection of two circles that are not currently drawn on your draft block. So I'm going to select A6 as the first center of my circle and then A4 as the second. And just like the last tool, you can decide if you want to take the first point of intersection or the second. You can assign a radius to each circle. I'm just going to type in 5 and 3. They don't intersect, so it'll just put it as close as it possibly can. Let's nudge these a little bit closer. There we go. Now we've got two intersecting circles. And then I hit apply. And notice on my draft block, if I click away from A7, those circles disappear because they aren't actually added to our draft block. They just exist as a reference to show us how we generated A7 here. Kind of interesting and kind of nice if you don't actually need these circles as part of your pattern block and you're only using them to get the point A7 for something else later. The next tool we're going to look at is Intersect Circle and Tangent. So the only thing we need currently on our draft block is the center of the circle and then the vertex where our tangent lines will originate. So I'm going to pick A6 as the center of my circle and A4 as the point on my tangent. So let's click A4 and A6, and then we just choose the radius of the circle around A6. So if I type in 1 centimeter and click apply, we can see that we get two lines originating from A4 coming off to meet the tangent of that circle on either side. Again, you can choose if you want the first point or the second point, which basically shakes down to the top point or the bottom point in this example. And as you adjust, notice we always have those tangent lines originating from A4 and touching our circle centered on A6. Again, not one I've really used for pattern design, but there's probably a cool quilting application in there somewhere. And if you figure it out, leave that in the comments for me. Before we use the next tool, which is Intersect Arc and Tangent, I actually have to draw the arc. And once I have an arc drawn, this behaves fairly similarly to the last tool we looked at. So let's say we have a radius of 3, a first angle of 270, and a second angle of 90. Because I want to use A5 or A4, I think, as the vertex of the angle created by my tangent lines. So then let's click our tool. The first thing we're going to do is select a point on the tangent. Let's grab A5 and then we choose our arc. And notice how it automatically draws two tangent lines from A5 grazing the arc there. So if we right click and look at the properties of A8, we can decide if we want to take the first point or the second point. So if you want both, you have to use this tool twice, which isn't really a big deal. Very similar to the previous tool. Not very difficult to use, but again, this is not one that I use very often when I'm drafting patterns. Our second to last tool is one that I actually use quite a bit, and this is the arc determined by radius and length. So the first thing I'm going to do is choose my center point. I clicked A6. Let's do a radius of 5, a first angle of 0 to specify where it originates, and then I can just choose the length of the arc. Now at first glance, this might not be necessarily interesting, but I tend to use curves to draft ruffles. So if I knew that, say I had the bottom of a skirt and I knew the length of the bottom of that skirt and I wanted to cut some ruffles on a curve so that they would add a little more body and drape, this would be the type of tool that I would use to draft that piece. Let's go ahead and clean up there before we move on to ellipses. The last tool we're going to look at in this section is the arc elliptical, which will generate an ellipse. So choose a center point for your elliptical arc, and then everything else is determined numerically on the side. You don't really draw this one and adjust it later. So let's start just by using it to draw a circle. So if I set the first angle to 0, the second angle to 360, and the rotation angle to 0 and hit apply, I will get a circle. But an ellipse has two radii that determine its shape. So let's look at what happens if I change the second radius to 2. So notice it is stretched. So the first radius is our horizontal radius and our second is the vertical. If I don't need the whole ellipse, I can choose which portions I want. So I could do like from 15 to 85 or something like that. And it would chop up that ellipse just like we've chopped up circles and arcs earlier on in this tutorial. So let me put that back. And then our last option just allows us to rotate, and remember we rotate counterclockwise. So if I put a rotation angle of 15 degrees in there, we can see that our ellipse will start to rotate. And I have used this one to generate tops of hats, things like that, stuffed animal feet. This one is a tool that I use quite a bit. And that looks like the end of our arcs, circles, and ellipses category. Let's recap part 4. All arcs in Seamly 2D are determined by a radius that is a certain distance from an origin point. Then either arc length or angles are used as the other parameter for the arc. Ellipses require 2 radii and 2 angles. And as always, use the timestamps below to jump back and review specific tools. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you come back for episode 5 where we talk about the operations you can do on the objects we've already drawn.